live. I'm reading Joan Marshall Grant, Speaking from the Heart. It's her book, and book about her, about ethics, reincarnation, and what it means to be human. It was published in 2007, I think. Joan Marshall Grant lived from 1907 till 1989. And this describes her life in part 4 here, which I am reading today, the years 1970 to 1989, which was the year of her death. The United States and England is where she lived. Chapter 13, Teaching the Basics. I first met Joan in June 1970 at a lunch party given by Maria Janis, wife of the pianist Byron Janis, we call Sophia Rossoff. I had read Many Lifetimes and was eager to meet her and her husband, Dennis Kelsey. This was all I knew about Joan at the time. I had no idea that she had written Winged Pharaoh and all her other beautiful books. Shortly afterwards, they left for France. It was about 6 months later that I had decided to lose some weight and was in the kitchen trying to cut up a grapefruit and making an awful mess. The phone rang and I ran to answer it, sticky hands and all, and it was Joan Grant. She said, "Sophia, how much would you charge a rich person for piano lessons?" "The same as anyone else." "Instead of piano lessons, could I ask you to read my notes for the book I want to write?" I was delighted. "When do we start?" I asked. We arranged to meet the next day, and I was about to hang up when Joan said, "Sophia, I must teach you how to cut up a grapefruit." I was amazed. How could she have known I was struggling with a grapefruit? Later, Joan would tell Sophia that she had recognized her immediately. Here was her grandmother, Jenny, the favorite person who died when Joan was 2 years old. Being Jenny is not something Sophia can recall, although she found herself playing unknown music that Joan said was Jenny's. But she does remember that when Joan was nearby, she allowed herself to think and feel anything that came up to her without censorship. As a pianist and teacher, she had long known that the notes on the paper were not the real music, that the performer must work to find the music behind the notes. With Joan's help, she said she discovered that the world was like the real music, that if I was fully present and used my 5 senses, that was not seen as well as was seen became the real world. The boundaries were removed. During the 1970s, Joan struggled with her heart and the drugs she took to control it. Nevertheless, she remained passionately eager to pass on the principles that she had uncovered in the course of her investigations. She saw patients, gave lectures and talks, filled notebooks and letters to Sophia with thoughts and insights, teachings, which they both hoped she would, in the course of time, publish. That never happened, but with Sophia's help she did complete a series of talks for British radio in 1973. Excuse me. During this period, Joan and Dennis had to give up the French house and lived for some years partly in New York and partly in England. Although New York had the advantage of being where Sophia and other close friends lived and where they had many followers, the city did not entirely suit Joan. In an apartment on the Upper East Side with a terrace and a view of Central Park that all agreed was glorious, she felt cut off from the cycle of the seasons, from close contact with plants and animals. Sophia remembers walking up Madison Avenue to meet her and finding Joan looking like a lost giraffe. She had an incredible accurate sense of location, like a musician with perfect pitch, and it worried her terribly that the so-called north-south axis of the New York avenues were not truly north-south. In London, Joan created window boxes for the flat she and Kay rented near Kensington Gardens and crammed them with flowering bulbs, miniature azaleas and other scented plants for the spring. It was about this time that Jane Lar, who was to become their friend and Joan's literary agent for the US, was treated by them in England. In due course, they spent less time in the United States and moved out of London to the countryside near Pangbourne, on the River Thames, some 30 miles away. During these years, Sophia was a frequent visitor, and on several occasions she and Joan went on holiday together, staying with Joan's friends and visiting famous gardens. One year they toured southern England in June, when many gardens are at their best. On June the 15th, Sophia and Joan had lunch with a friend of Joan's at Bewley, where she had lived briefly with Charles in the late 1950s in the New Forest, not far from the coast, and Joan's childhood home at Hayling Island. When Sophia returned to New York, she went to a meeting of the Sensory Awareness Foundation. The minutes of the previous meeting of June 15th were read out. Present, Sophia Rossoff. "I wasn't there, I was in England," interrupted Sophia quickly. "You were here," said 5 voices. To prove it, they described what she had been wearing. It was exactly what she had worn for the lunch in Bewley. Confused, she called Joan in Pangbourne and told her what had happened. "You can be in 2 places at once," she said very simply, and went on to tell me about the enchanting kittens the farm cat had deposited on her bed that morning. As the years went by, it became harder for Dennis to work with Joan, finding her intuitive flashes of insight and vision, her hunches and hooves, an intrusion into his own gentler, systematic approach. In a note, Joan tried to define the difference between them, a difference which she then hoped could be exploited as a strength rather than a division, a view that Jane and other people who were treated by them working as a team have endorsed. Perhaps others would not. Kay's technique and mine, both excellent in their own right, but dreadful for each other, and the poor followers if one or the other tries to change the relevant rhythm. Jay is to lead somewhere over a very thin and vertigo-making bridge, which they have to cross if they want to continue on their basic journey. One sees planks strung in lianas over a river on high precipitous sides, or a tree trunk over a river with crocodiles, but the principle for Jay is, follow me and I will protect you with, share with you and all that I have of my 5 senses, the sense of balance which comes from 2 eyes, 2 ears, and also the 2 nostrils, sniffing the wind to feel which way the wind blows, and the basic I know where I am, i.e. the system of gravity field in which I and you immediately find ourselves. J is to reawaken their 5 senses so that they can again make use of them to recreate their own equilibrium. K's approach, equally valid in its own field, is to rescue people from their non-feel concepts, because he is a concept rather than a feel person. He identifies much better than J does. To J being Joan obviously, to J his job is to show people how to pick their way carefully between stones, thorns, etc. A slow progression, but very important. K is to enter into the concept and slowly translate the concept into the feel, for lack of which feel the concept and a concept is a no-feel arose. Indeed, life with Joan was not always easy, as Sophia discovered early in their friendship when she turned up for an appointment one day and Joan did not look up from what she was writing. She said hello, but Joan never replied or even acknowledged her presence. Annoyed, Sophia left. The next day, Joan sent her granddaughter Nicola over to explain that this was what happened when Joan was having a hove. Less involved in the daily round of seeing patients, Joan, whom all her life had had the sense of urgent knowledge to impart, and had done so by writing books or via the high-level recall and healing sessions of the 1940s, or as a lay therapist in the 1960s, in these later years could simply be the teacher she was. She loved company. Loneliness was her biggest fear. Fans who had read her farm memory book, seekers who had heard of their past life regression work, friends and past patients who came to see her were rewarded by the vivid interest she took in their lives and the vigorous common sense of her advice and insights. What one would call her teachings. Another memory of Sophia's is an example. A client of my husband, Noah, was having a summer picnic at his home in Connecticut, and we invited Joan and Kay, who were staying with us at our country home in Sheffield, Massachusetts, to come with us. I was driving and, as always, managed to get lost. I stopped to ask a policeman for directions, which got us there. The next day, Joan told me off. "Sophia, you were not very nice to that policeman yesterday." "But I did say please and thank you," I protested. "You should have said something to him that made a difference to his day, something he could go home and tell his wife about." I told my friends the story and soon was getting reports back that they were exhausted from trying to do or say something special to everyone they came across. Joan did practice what she preached, not always, of course, but when Sophia was asked to write a personal obituary about Joan when she died in 1989, she recalled a blistering hot afternoon in London when she and Joan were in a taxi returning home from lunch. I wanted to stop to get some tickets for a concert at the Albert Hall that evening. Joan waited in the taxi. When I returned, I heard her saying to the driver, "What you need is a cold shower. I live around the corner. You can come and have one in my flat." When we got there, Joan told him to park the taxi. He looked bewildered and said, "Do you really mean it?" He came upstairs with us and Joan had a patient waiting to see her. She asked me to give him a towel, show him the bathroom and offer him a cold beer, which I did. As he left, he shook his head in disbelief. "Just wait until I tell my wife." At quiet moments when no one else was there or she was having one of her sleepless nights, Joan would pick up one of her ever-sharpened pencils and jot things into the notebooks that were always at hand. These unpublished writings form the rest of this book. It is worth remembering that the time was the 1970s. Long hair, drugs, Vietnam, communism versus capitalism, women's liberation, and the sex wars. Men had recently stepped onto the surface of the moon. Computers were vast infants for use by governments and universities and corporations. Communication systems, telephones, radio, television had come into their own during Joan's lifetime and done away with the rest, with the need for the kind of psychic communication that had come in useful in ancient Egypt, but were nothing compared to what we have had and will have since then. The churches were ill-attended. Christianity seemed outmoded and irrelevant. It was 30 years before 9/11. Worth remembering, not because Joan's words seem dated, although she sometimes addresses hot topics of the day that no longer seem as relevant, but for the opposite reason, that they are so fresh and open-minded, unrestricted by convention. Not written for publication, off the cuff, straightforward, impatient, humorous, imaginative. This is Joan's voice as if she were alive and talking to us. Notes suggest that Joan was thinking of writing a book or a lecture series to which she gave the working title of Teach Them the Basics. In one, she listed the following topics: evolution, God, ethics of breeding, debunk all men are equal, individual versus group, education and children, ethics of money. In another, she adds, clean up this planet. The following chapters broadly follow her plan, but we begin with teaching and we conclude with the most basic of the basics, love. For Joan said over and over again that learning to love each other better is the most important task we arrive on earth to do. So I stop this here at this page. The next is chapter 14, entitled From Hand to Hand, the Torch is Passed. Happy Tuesday.